Good evening, everyone. Hello, this is Sherry Sims, founder of Black Career Women's Network. Thank you for tuning in for another segment of Career Conversations. Tonight I have with me my National Network leader, Monica McIntyre. Say hello.
Hi, ladies.
Tonight we're going to be talking about how to cope with office politics and dealing with that company corporate culture, the stuff we cannot stand to deal with. But first, before we get started, for all of you women out there who are new to viewing our Google Hangout, if you're not a member, we would love for you to join at bcwnetwork.com, and also follow us on Twitter with the same handle, and also on Facebook. Tonight, as Monica and I talk through this topic along with the members who are also on the Hangout, we're going to be really talking about some tips that you can use to help cope with the office politics. And I'm sure you all have some stories out there that you want to share. We want to hear them because Monica and I have some stories of our own that we would love to share about politics, office politics, and also company culture. Company culture is hard to handle, depending on, the industry and the company that you're working for. So I want to go ahead and jump right in, starting with Monica. Monica, share with us a story or experience that you've had with, office politics.
Oh, wow. I guess one that comes to mind, I was talking to a friend about this the other day, is I'm sure everyone has experienced that person that you work with or, at your place of work, and you wonder, how have they been working here for so long? Because they don't do anything. And then you realize that, a VP or whatever has been protecting them along the way because they're, quote unquote, part of that good old boys club or that culture to where they have been able to keep a very high paying, this person was making six figures. However, he was like the office, I hate to say joke, but people made fun of him a lot and said, oh my gosh, I'm not going to say his name, obviously, but I'm going to call him Bob. But everyone would be like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe Bob did this or Bob said that. And he continued to grow with the company because someone was protecting him and just holding him up and keeping him safe the whole time during his career, while everyone is pretty much behind him, shaking their heads, saying, how is this happening? But that culture, he was part of that culture, was part of that group, and because of that, he was protected, and I believe still is protected with this particular company.
Now, they say you have a mentor and then there's a sponsor, and the sponsor is the one that you want because the sponsor is the one that is your spokesperson. They're the ones who can speak for you and say that, John Doe is best for this position. This is why you should hire him for this position, whether it's internal or external.
Right.
When you have office politics in that comes into play, and then you also have the fact that he's protected. Do you really consider that person a sponsor, or are they just Secret Service?
Yeah. See, right. This was just, I think in this particular situation, obviously, maybe the guy was good early on in his career. I don't know. So at that point, it might have been a sponsor, but as the years went on, it was simply just protecting him, and I think they had built a friendship. And since this person was in a higher position, he was able to save him time and time again. But in the beginning, it might have been. I did not really see him in action until later in his career, and I wasn't impressed when I did see him in action. So I think things changed along the way because I was getting ready to say I can't believe he would have been sponsored early on in his career, but it might have been a protection from the beginning. I don't know, but that was the first thing that came into my mind because I think many people can relate to that person that has been protected and maybe didn't have been protected. And you do see people who have been either sponsored or mentored, and you see them kind of growing in their career, rightfully so.
And that's what you want to see. You want to see somebody going rightfully in
Right.
their role and not being sponsored for the wrong reasons, or
Right.
because eventually it will catch up with them. The higher up they go, the more politics they have to play, and eventually whatever value system they have will play itself out in,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how far they go.
Right.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was a tip, and I have about 5 tips in terms of dealing with office politics, and then of course the company culture kind of speaks for itself in that. But the first one I want to talk about is understand them, and them is everybody else, right?
Right.
Outside of you in the workplace, and then get in the game. As much as we do not want to play office politics, we have to. Unfortunately, we really have to. It's part of survival, especially if you're working in corporate America. It's how you're going to survive. And I
Right.
remember specifically a story of mine, and I think I've shared this before, about my first manager position and my very first day at the copy machine.
Oh yeah.
This lady, who I didn't know who she was, introduced herself to me and was welcoming me, and also stating that, did you know such and such was a lesbian? And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't care either way. But at the end of the day, when I needed to share this information, share my day with, with the manager, who happens to be, I didn't report directly to them, but it was like a dotted line thing. You know how that go. I had a remote manager, and then I had the dotted line manager local.
Right.
Sharing this information with the manager, and they come to find out, lo and behold, the manager I'm talking to is the one that the gossip had been shared with me. And I
Mm.
wasn't gossiping. I was just stating that I couldn't believe this person had shared this with me on my first day at the copier.
Right.
So come to find out, they were best friends, and then my relationship was strained day one with the other person, who I come to find out need to have a really good, strong relationship with in order to be effective in my job.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that was really my first taste of true politics, in the sense of being in that managerial role, because that was where when I learned to. I mean, that's when I started believing that the higher up you go, the more politics you have to play, and the more your values are compromised, because you're going to have to do things you necessarily may not feel is the right thing to do.
Right.
So building that relationship with her was tough. Overall, a lot of things that I've seen, didn't match with my values, but I had to play the game in order to survive and feed my kid.
Right.
So that was a tough lesson for me, but it was a good one, because eventually I learned, definitely how to survive in terms of alliances, and what to say, what not to say, and whom to say it to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we got some viewers on the. I'm looking here, and no questions yet. I know y'all have some stories out there. Come on.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of which, when you were talking about, I remember I had started a position and had all these great ideas. I'm like, oh, we can do this, we can do that. And, really trying to get in there and do a good job and implement some of my great ideas that I was doing. Well, I didn't quite understand the culture. And it was taken and presented to me like I was going rogue. Like I was doing, too much. And what are you doing? We don't do that here. And we have we do this on this level, and it's kind of like I was going rogue and stepping out my boundaries, versus I'm thinking I have all these great ideas that can improve this department. Let's run with it. But at that time I really didn't understand the culture, and they were looking at me like, oh, she's going rogue and she's trying to do her own thing, which is outside of the company structure. So now you have to be mindful sometimes of what the company culture is and the politics, because it can be viewed a certain way. At least in my case, it was kind of like I was going rogue, and I'm like, I'm thinking I'm doing a great thing to help the department and move forward, and no, my hand got slapped really quickly.
No, I think you're right, because if you have to understand them, which is I always say, meet you against them pretty much, and
Right.
then get in the game. And part of that is exactly how you said, which is finding out who has the power and the influence in your office,
Right.
and then who are the team members that's friends with your boss, or your
Mm-hmm.
boss's boss, and find out who those people are. I
Right.
mean, perfect example is what happened to me that first day of my job, not knowing that my dotted line boss's boss, this was her friend, so I was
Mm-hmm.
kind of caught in this middle without knowing. Before I even had a chance to play the game, I was already losing the game. And
Right.
so pretty much, I hate to say it this way, but you have to play them before they play you. And we're not talking about getting over, but you need to learn how to play the game
Yeah.
before they start playing it on you, and you don't even recognize what's going
Exactly.
on.
Right. That's
And
so true.
so that's one of the things you need to learn. One, if you don't take away anything else, viewers, you need to find out in the office who is the power, who has the power and the influence, who's your boss friends with, who's your boss, who's the friends of your boss's boss, because you need to know who those people are and
Right.
proactively start trying to build relationships with them. It's
Right.
I mean, you're trying to get protection. It's like, being in the Secret Service, or what is it, a witness protection program.
Yes.
But you're not just doing it to protect yourself, but you're also positioning yourself to really have a perception. You want to set yourself up to have the right perception.
Right.
And
Right.
that having those right alliances will position you to have the right perception. Whether
Right.
you have a mentor or a sponsor in that environment or not doesn't matter. If you have the right relationships, that helps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's talk about the tip number 2, which is know the difference between fair and unfair office politics.
Ooh.
Let's spend a little time on that, because it is what it is. I mean,
Mhm.
one thing I learned is to trust my gut.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When I see something happening in the workplace, and having coming from a background of HR, I have seen some unethical stuff, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not talking about just from a supervisor level or from managerial level, but from an HR team, overall. So let's talk about that. Give me some insight on that in terms of you experiencing fair and unfair, out blatant. It's just wrong office politics.
Ooh. Oh my gosh. I guess this kind of goes back to where I was new in a role, and it's kind of certain people can get away and do certain things and you can't. And an example of that, gosh, this just comes down to like someone's image. I've got two examples of this. A couple different jobs I had. This was a male. He would come to work just looking disheveled. I mean, like he just rolled out the bed, hair all fly away, just looked a hot mess. And it's like, how come he can just come in here looking any kind of way and nothing's ever said to
Mm-hmm.
him? And I'm like, that's not one. It's like he's a representation of this company, meeting with customers, outside customers, looking a hot mess. But that was quote unquote acceptable. But it was fair for him to do that. But couldn't nobody else come to work looking like that? So that was one example. And the other example is kind of the same thing. I don't know why this dress is sticking in my head, but it was the same thing. This particular person would come to work looking more like casual, like they was getting ready to go to the park and have a picnic, with a little short skirt on and hair pulled back and just looked like a casual day, versus coming to work. And it was kind of like everyone kind of knew that was acceptable for her, but no one else really would
Mm-hmm.
try that. So, which was unfair. But both of these people had relationships with management, or a step up on management. So somehow they were able to work that and do that unfair type of behavior. So those are the two things that came across my mind first thing. Um, I can't even think of anything fair. The two things I thought of were unfair. But
That's a shame. You know, that's a shame, don't you? When you don't
I know
really have
it
anything.
is a shame.
Viewers, if you have a story about somebody, witnessing fair politics, office politics, or maybe you experience fair, please tell us. We want to hear. We want to hear your story. Please type it in. We want to hear about it. I remember when I was in my early 20s and I was working in a retail store, and all I wanted to do was just be the department manager for the department.
Mm-hmm.
So I took ownership of, you know, running it like it was my own, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like, you know, thinking mindset of that it was, you know, I owned it all. But and then I worked so hard to do that, and then this other girl comes in and gets the department manager position. And then come to find out, when she started in the department, she told me that she only wanted this job because, you know, she was getting a divorce. She didn't want to come in and just be a retail salesperson. She wanted to be a manager. So she was friends with the you know, the store manager over the whole, you know, the whole department store manager over the whole store.
Okay.
And she gave her the job. No qualification, and she didn't work. She's a housewife. She didn't even work, and she wanted the job and got it. And I'm thinking, okay, now I'm busted my butt all this time to prove that I can, you know, I could do this job and earn it. And then, you know, complexion for the protection comes in.
Wow.
and she gets the job and never worked because it's been a housewife since high school. And then, you know, and then she screws the job up. Of course, I was mad at first, and I had to check myself. And I kept doing good work, and eventually, you know, I moved on and got a better position in another company, and then was able to get a good reference from them. But it was hard at first. I had attitude. I had angry black girl attitude.
Right.
You know?
Right.
How dare she come up in here, and I've been working here for all this long, and she get it just because she's friends with the, you know, the department store manager of the whole department store.
Right.
And she be it, and, you know, we're besties now, and they're going to lunch and the whole thing.
Right.
So I think, to me, in my 20s, that was a slap in my face of what, you know, what true office politics were like. And, you know, and it was like, is it really worth, at that age, I was like, is it really worth it to try to prove yourself when you can be screwed over in a heartbeat behind a relationship? And it didn't take me till years later to realize the importance of the relationship building piece, and you know, how that can help with, you know, building your career.
Right. Right.
So that was my first blow in my face with office politics, you know.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, but you still have to make those choices, though, in terms of what's fair and unfair. Now, I may have witnessed something fair that happened, probably forgot about it because it did.
I know. Isn't that a shame?
You know, probably because it wasn't significant enough to even talk about, or really made an impact on maybe not just my position, but maybe someone else that was in, you know, in the organization too. I'm not sure, but I think that's kind of sad.
It's kind of sad. I'm sitting up here thinking, because I know I have witnessed fair, you know, but I don't know. The first thing that comes to your mind is unfair, which I understand why that sticks out. But in the same token, I'm like, I know there's some fair things that I have seen and witnessed. So I need to look more on the positive stuff and not the negative. But it's important, though, to learn those lessons from those unfair situations, because at least in the ones that I've experienced, it was built on relationship. Whether that relationship was really what it should have been to keep that person going or not, but they had built that foundation on relationship. And then with you, the networking piece, when that person came in to that role without any experience or background, that's all about networking and who you know. So all of that stuff goes into account, but then again, the person should also be qualified to do the job. I think obviously you would have felt, maybe still would have been mad, but would have felt differently at least if the person was qualified to do the job. So.
Well, yeah, I think that, but I think part of that comes from, you know, who the players are in the game. Because here you are, this young girl. I'm you know, 20-something years. No, I'm not even 25. I'm still in the early digits. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So I'm not understanding what all that means. So when you have someone who's fresh out the box like that, who hasn't played the game, you can get over because they don't know any, but they're not going to speak up because they don't know, or so you think.
Right.
Now I think 20-something year olds are a lot more sharper coming into the game now. than they were back in my God, I feel like I'm aging old, girl. That's the same. But no, I do feel like they're a lot sharper because they have a lot more information,
Yeah.
access to a lot more information in terms of how to develop themselves career-wise. Back then, we come from, in our 20s, we come from an age where it was really before internet was really what it is today.
Right.
So our resources and how we learned about career development was so different than right now. You can just type it in and get the access right in front of your face like we're doing tonight.
Exactly.
And learn how to develop yourself, which I think is an awesome tool. There's no reason for a 20-something-year-old to go into the workplace and not be equipped to deal with some of the stuff that they're going to endure. Not starting out now and throughout their career if they continue to want to stay in that the corporate America arena.
Exactly. Because for me, I was like first generation in my family, going to college and having the quote unquote white collar job versus the blue collar job. I didn't know anything about mentors, sponsors. I didn't know. I didn't have anybody to talk to. I didn't know. So I was kind of fumbling through and learning it as I went along. Things would happen and I would get mad, and because I just didn't know. I didn't know anything about culture. I didn't know anything about politics. I was just saying, okay, let me go to work and try to do a good job, and all this stuff is happening, and I'm sitting there like, well, wait a minute, well, this not right, and what do I do? And so it was really learning experience. But I agree, the 20-somethings, oh my gosh, they have so much access, not just for internet, but can really reach out to people and get that advice. And obviously, this career conversation is one tool to do that. So.
I mean, yeah, they are so, to me, these 20-somethings are coming out of college. They are so many light years ahead of where we were. And any women who are viewing that are in that age bracket, probably at least 35 and up, what we're talking about, in terms of not really having access to the things they have now to really learn how to develop yourself.
Right.
But let's go on to tip number 3, which is investing time to build strategic relationships. And this is a huge one because some people think that when you're dealing with the politics part, it's about kissing asses, and it's not really about that. It's not really about kissing butt.
No.
Unfortunately, it's about survival. I mean, and you may not want to think of it that way, but I know I do. That it's about survival, because as soon as your back is turned, you could be thrown up on the bus for anything, and you're not even in the same room present to defend yourself.
Right.
So let's talk about ways that you can strategically build relationships in the workplace, and then also keep those relationships going once you move on.
Right. Yeah, that is key. I think there's a number of ways you can start building relationships within the workplace. I mean, especially when you're first starting a position, or even if you've been in a position for a while, you have to try to meet people where they are, find a common interest, even just kind of go out to lunch, get away from the workplace, and just kind of get to know people on a personal level, kind of see where their head is at. And not just see whether they can be an ally for you, but you also got to be aware of those people who might be trying to sabotage you or got another agenda going on. You have to be wary and conscious of them too, so you know how to maneuver and handle them as well. But just kind of striking up a conversation, finding something mutual. It doesn't even have to be work related, just something to kind of have a connection and to start building a relationship. And to even keep, in touch with people if you're no longer with the company and have moved on, just to kind of see what's going on, how they're doing. If you're in the same industry, you can share tips and this, that, and the other to kind of keep that relation, to build it and then keep it going.
Right, because it is about building this sphere of influence, right? You have, but also they can have, because even though you may not work together anymore, they can work for the company. They still can be a sponsor in a way if you both are still in the same industry, and they're in a position of influence that can be a great recommendation, or that it can be a mentor, or it may turn into that. You just never know.
Right.
But I think that if you show someone that you like them and that you respect something about them, I think that also, that's another tip. I think that also helps too when you can identify something specifically about them that you respect and share that with them.
Right.
Especially if it comes to their work ethic or how the quality of their work, things that
Mm-hmm.
matter to help the relationship in the workplace, not necessarily personal,
Mm-hmm.
but something work related that you can respect what they do. I think that kind of helps to up your points when it
Right.
comes to building that relationship with them
Mm-hmm.
um, in the workplace. And I mean, I think when you are trying to establish something in common with them, it's not always the case.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think depending on the age difference and what you talk about, sometimes establishing a common ground can sometimes be, um, you know, opens up for more personal conversation in order to find out what that is. And if you
Right.
have to be comfortable with having those conversations in order to find out more about that.
Right.
But I will say, for anybody who's viewing, if you are one of those kind of coworkers who wants to come to work and do your work and hold your head down, and then 5 o'clock or whatever time you get off, you're ready to hit the door, and you're not building these relationships. I mean, that's career suicide,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you're not doing yourself any service by you're doing a good job, but then nobody can see you do it, which is another tip, which is subtly promote, self promote your what you're doing.
Right.
You want
Mm-hmm.
people to see your work,
Right.
you
Yeah,
know.
and then there's that perception about you that, oh, she's standoffish, or I can't approach her, and this and the other, and you thinking, let me just get in here and do my job and leave when it's time to go home. But then there's a perception that, can start about you, which, like you said, can be sabotaged down the road.
Yeah. Two other tips that you can actually do in terms of building strategic relationships is, connect with them on a deeper level. What I mean by that is that go to lunch with them and ask them for some career advice.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, maybe if they have kids, ask them, hey, my kid does this little crazy thing. Does yours do that? Because the kid thing is always a safe, neutral place if you got
Mhm.
kids.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then, find a way to help them with something at work. So if there's a side project they're doing, if they are trying to meet a deadline and you're in a good place with your workload, help them, or at
Mm-hmm.
least offer to help them. And then too, when you're new in the workplace, you don't want to do that too quickly because they're trying to feel you out,
Right.
and you need to feel them out and find out,
Mm-hmm.
because they're looking at you to see, okay, is she a threat, or can I trust her?
Right.
They're looking at you to try to size up what kind of coworker or colleague you're going to be.
Right.
So you guys are kind of assessing each other, so you need to be mindful of that. As much as you're trying to feel them out, they're feeling you out too.
Right.
And so you've got to be mindful of how you go about building those relationships when you're new. But let's talk for a minute about someone that you've been having an issue with. And
Oh.
the office politics gets ugly with this person. And it's something about them you don't like. Because I've had one of those before. If this coworker, it's something about him you don't like. You haven't put your finger on it just yet. And
Right.
and the two of you have this tension between the two of you. It hasn't escalated to where you got to go to a manager to resolve it. But how do you work through that? Especially if this is somebody who has an influence in the workplace.
Right. That's hard. Um, we've all had that. I've had that. And you try to sit back and try to figure out, what is it? Why? What is it about this person? Even though we're not going to like everyone. I mean, you get that. But it's kind of like, what is it about this person to where it just rubs me the wrong way, or just there's some kind of vibe, I'm not feeling it, this, that, and the other. I have had that a couple of times, and I have tried to still, even though I feel the vibe, and I'm like, I know they feel it, and I feel it, I still try to be professional, strike up conversation, whatever the case may be, kind of still keep it professional, but not just, if I'm just going to talk business with you and just cut it off, because you don't want it to get to that nasty, kind of nice nasty level, if you will. But I've just kind of kept it going, and try to work through it. But that's one that has been hard for me. I haven't gotten to a bad blow up situation with that, but it's an uncomfortable settling feeling, especially when you're trying to figure out what is it about this person that, you know, in my gut is not feeling very good. Is it, do I think they're going to sabotage me? Is it a trust issue? You're trying to figure out what it is. And I think if you knew what it is, sometimes you can deal with it better.
I agree with that. Takesha Williams is viewing. Hi, Takesha! All the way from Richmond, Virginia. She put a question on here, and it says, building relationships help you position yourself when an opening arises in other departments and areas. There's a strategy to building relationships in corporate America. You never know whose desk your name will come across, and that is so true.
Yes.
And that is so part of the building the relationships and having, you know, your sponsor or your you know, your sphere of influence, circle of influence around you. That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's very huge. Takesha has a background before she became an entrepreneur. Her background was in retail management.
Okay.
And I think retail management is probably one of the best places to get your experience when it comes to learning about the whole politics thing. I mean, I think there's no rawer ground to me than retail to learn about or learn how to develop those skills to survive, you know, the politics like that.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing, Takesha, that question, you know, your thoughts on that. So let's go to tip number 4, which is self-promote your network. How do you do that? How do you self-promote your network? But who's in your network, first of all? And if you don't have a network, who do you need to have in it, and how do you go about building it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Self-promote your network. Well, I think you have to look at your skills and ability and what value you have to offer within your role and within the company. I mean, once you kind of figure out some of the politics and what's acceptable and what's not, and not only what you do well in your job, whatever that piece is, you can help build your network by sharing those best practices, you know, with other coworkers and assisting them if at all possible. Bringing it up to your manager as well. In one of my positions, that's kind of what I did, which for me was like a no-brainer on some of my organizational skills. And I had brought up, it was a simple agenda. I mean, to me, which was like, what's the big deal? It was just a simple agenda. I presented it to my manager. Well, I didn't really present it to her. I just put it together for a meeting, and she ran with it. So you kind of got to pick up on those little key points. And once I noticed that, I was like, okay, that little nugget, they appreciate it. How can I help build and grow this to not only my coworkers, but even upper management as well, and to try to kind of build my network and value that I can bring and kind of help them and allow me to shine as well.
No, I think that you hit on some really, you know, you targeted on some really good points in terms of, you know, really not necessarily being a go-to person, but you're setting yourself up to have this level of expertise that shared amongst, you know, amongst your team or your colleagues, coworkers, or whatever, that can help you to position yourself for promotion. At some point, or maybe not even promotion, just credibility and respect overall.
Right.
You know, it doesn't have to be a promotion. I mean, it could. I mean, to me, having that credibility is important, and then having that level of respect that I do know what I'm talking about. But not only that, but then, you know, really monitoring what you do and making sure that you're getting credit for your work.
Exactly.
You know, a perfect example. I had a former from a previous employer that I worked for, not recently, but she had asked that I, you know, share something within the next meeting in terms of not necessarily like a I guess it really was something that all of us could share in terms of coworkers together. So I decided let's do a workplace personality, you know, evaluation, and That way we can kind of get to know each other a little bit better in terms of our work style and understand what our work styles are, so we can kind of work together a little better.
Right.
So I did that, and so we did it during our meeting, and we were able to go through their process. And then about a month or so later, as there's someone else who had gotten a position that I had applied for, who was nowhere near as qualified as me.
Oh.
You got the position. Again, another story about the office politics right in your face.
Mm.
And I overheard the manager sharing with that person's new boss about this workplace personality assessment that she had, had given, and it was just, like it was her idea, and to give her. So this is more insight that you can have on this employee that you have. And I was thinking, and I just shook my head like, you know what, your day is coming, sister girl.
Right.
And it did eventually. It did. Eventually, she was definitely terminated. Eventually, but small things like that. Instead of just giving credit where credit is due, and saying that one of our employees had shared this during a meeting. I think it's a valuable tool, and I think that you'll see it as valuable to use for your new employee moving forward. Just show some level of integrity. We're not saying that you need to just toot someone else's horn, but sometimes you just need to do the right thing, because the integrity piece is important for the credibility, especially if you're working in an environment that for yourself.
Right.
That that all the way around, the whole circle around you is corrupt, and you don't want to fall into that whole lion's den.
Right. That is true. Give credit where credit is due. I think that is huge, because it does establish your credibility. And I do that all the time. If someone has an idea, I always make sure I give them credit for that, because you don't want to take something away from someone. Give them their due. I think that's huge, and that's like a big pet peeve of mine when people don't do that, because it'll eventually come back to bite you.
And I think, not trying to get off the subject, because we can talk about manager styles all day long. And that's probably another Google Hangout. We probably need to schedule something about manager styles, for real.
Right, yeah.
But I think that with that in mind is that, a manager can only be as strong as their team, or sometimes that the team is what holds the whole, holds the weight of the team. The team, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the team can be strong, but the manager can be weak.
Right.
And so when you have a weak manager and a strong team, that's not a good mix, because that team eventually is going to leave the company because they're not getting what they need to develop, or use their strengths.
Right.
That's their ability within their current role. Because if you have a weak manager, more than likely they're insecure, and they're going to micromanage, and they're probably going to sabotage. Mm-hmm. Which I call workplace bullies, which is what they really are to a certain extent. Okay. But I think that if you don't have that strong manager who believes in developing their people and allowing them to work in their strengths, because really, in my mind, for a manager, you should want a team that's going to make you look good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't want to have your hands in the pot on everything. You want a team that is competent, can work in their strengths, and make you look good, instead of boasting about, you're boasting about my team, but you're saying I instead of saying we, and a lot of managers I've had in my career, that's always been the case.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that is true. You're only as strong as your team, and your team can make or break you as a manager. And if you don't work and to develop them, bring out their strengths, and also help them with some areas that they need to be improved upon, at the end of the day, they're going to look at you as the manager with regards to what's happening with this team. So, especially in a managerial position, not only are you trying to figure out the company culture and the politics and this, that, and the other, then you got to figure out, okay, what kind of team am I dealing with? What kind of personalities on this team? And all depending, you'll have some people who are tenured that have been there 20 years, someone else that's been there 2 years, and the people that have been there 20 years, they have their own set ways about the company, and they know the politics and this, that, and the other. So then you're managing and learning not just the position, the politics, the culture, personalities of your peers, personalities of your direct reports. It's a lot of things you have to navigate and be aware of as you're cultivating all of those relationships and building respect, trust, and all of that. It's a lot, but you have to really think about that and pretty much plan it out and be strategic about it with regards to how to do that.
Now, I have to say this. Didn't that sound exhausting?
It is. It did. Because it is. Because I'm thinking about that now because
That sounds so exhausting, but if you think about it, it is so true.
It is true. It's a lot you have to do, especially as a manager.
Yeah, and that way, and the thing about it is, it's not just these managers and the politics isn't just with the leadership teams. You
Right.
talk about your actual cohorts, your co-workers are playing these games, and they play the
Right.
game. They play the games with the managers. And I can say specifically when when I worked in HR for a specific Fortune 500 company, and we had several employees who knew how to play the game well. I mean, and got over with it in terms of, I'm threatening to sue. I'm going to go to EEOC, and I'm going to be off for a year, and you're going to pay me.
Right. Yeah.
and having an HR manager really kind of bow down to that and let it just let it slide, because they always was threatening to sue, what have you. So you have employees who know how to play that game. Once they figure out what the politics really are, some of them will milk it for what it's worth. And I have seen it's when it was time for reduction in force, not specifically with this company, before another one.
Mm-hmm.
Where we're going in and we're having to say, okay, we're having to do a reduction in force, and we're having to look at everyone based on performance. And
Right.
then we're pulling records, we're looking, and then it gets down to a couple of people, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, we want this person because even though they are flawed in this particular area, we want them to stay because of this. And then the other person who necessarily may not have any performance issues, but may not have the right relationships, or people are not necessarily do not like them, but the work is always good, work ethic is stellar. Looks at who's gonna get who we gonna keep and who's staying, not necessarily based on performance at all, but on some bull crap.
Right.
And I've actually seen some people get terminated who didn't deserve it, and there's some who stayed and really are the ones who are more of a risk in the long run.
Right.
And it's things like that, again, that politics piece that's right in your face, that you just think, wow, how did that just happen?
Right.
And then this person, and I go home and I'm thinking to myself, that person has to go home now and tell their spouse, I've lost my job and I'm trying to figure out why.
Right.
I mean, really, truly, the fact that, we had to cut back and lay off some people, and that's the excuse they're using, but they're not really knowing behind the scenes what really went into making that decision.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you know that as a manager, that, you probably had to make a decision like that. Have you ever made a decision like that where you had to be first?
Unfortunately, because when I was with this particular company, and they did what was called a stack ranking. So there was a particular form you had to fill out. You had to check all these boxes on all of these, individual people to try to determine, because we're going to do a reduction in force based on this stack ranking, who you had to have the conversation with. So I've been on both ends. I've had to do one, and I've been a part of one. So, and when I was a part of one, I was looking like, now I know, compared to so that I wasn't on the top of this stack ranking. What else went into this decision? And then my coworkers was like, I can't believe that this happened to you and not so-and-so. But there was some other stuff that went on with so-and-so, because I think that was part of that they was protected, not like for EEOC or whatever, but it was something else with them. And I was like, oh, that's why they were saved, because they had this situation, about a month or two ago. So they weren't going to touch them because they might have had a lawsuit or what have you. So it was that kind of stuff going on. But I've been a part of both. So yeah, that stack ranking is difficult, but I try to always be partial and stick to that form that they filled out, and you try to take the personality part as much as you can out of it, unless the person was extremely disconnected to not only their team but like their customers. But yeah, it's a difficult process, and I've done it, and I've been a part of it.
Yeah, and I've had to do that as well. And I remember specifically when it happened to me once, and I knew for sure. I mean, here I am. They call me in. They're saying, and we all knew eventually it was coming because they had closed one of our locations. That the company had lost over $5 million when Enron had. It was during the time when Enron was in.
Oh, okay.
They had some accounts with Enron. They lost over $5 million, and they ended up firing the CEO. So we knew there was going to be some org changes at some point. But we just didn't know who would be the one to get cut. And I thought, well, okay, it's not going to be me because I worked my tail off, and such. She don't do a darn thing.
Right. Exactly.
It's known. It's given. She's calling sick every week. Gets away with. And just literally stuff that that if it was you definitely would have your pink slip as soon as the pattern would start happening.
Right.
And there were times that it was rumored that it was getting close to her being terminated, but it never happened. So when I was the one that was selected, yes, of course I was the last one that was hired, but I had been working there for a couple of years. So and had a proven track record of my performance. So I knew it wasn't about that. But I thought maybe because in my mind, this is before I went into HR. I thought in my mind maybe it's because I was the last hired, and that so the severance wouldn't be as much because the other ladies had been there tenured like 5+ years.
Okay.
Is what I was thinking. I said it couldn't have been performance related because it couldn't have been based on that for me. No, but you don't know who made that final decision.
Right.
In terms of what they thought. And then once I got into HR and started experiencing it for myself in terms of rifts and kind of what some of the determining factors would be in that, and I was like, man, this is how they was playing the game. This is what they were doing. And it wasn't always fair. Right. And so that kind of gave me some insight into that, which, so when I hear that now, all kind of stuff starts racing in my mind because I'm thinking, the good person never necessarily is going to be the one who gets to stay. The good person.
Right. No. Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
So true.
My last tip for the night, and we're going to talk about this one for just a moment because Monica and I had already kind of shared some thoughts about this one, but we're talking about the last tip of the night is regularly do a SWOT analysis of your work reputation. Good one. And you need to do that because you don't know specifically, especially if when you're new, you really can't do it initially at first. But if you've been there for a while, at least 6 months to a year in and longer, you definitely need to do a SWOT analysis of your work reputation, whether it's if you do one-on-ones with your boss, but find a way to look for opportunities to find out what's going on with, who's saying what about you. Now, when you're new, you should do it within the first 90 days.
Right.
But if you have been in the position for a while, don't wait till your annual review to find out, what your work reputation is like. You need to be trying to touch base with that throughout the year, and don't wait till there's conflict to do that. So let's talk about that, Monica. Let's talk about how do you do a regular SWOT analysis of your work reputation.
Ooh. When you told me this, I said, ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
There's a couple of different ways. I know I've done this myself, not really calling it a SWOT analysis, but when I was early on in a position, I was having problems getting input and feedback from management. But I also, because I had direct reports, I looked and asked my team when I was doing one-on-ones with them, and I was assessing their strengths and seeing where they are, I asked the question of them, based on how things have been going so far, my interaction with you, and I wanted them to be brutally honest, and it took me a while so that they can trust me to get to that point.
Okay.
I meant that. I was just not saying that to say that, because I can't grow and improve if I don't know where I need to grow and improve in. But I actually got feedback from my direct reports, having that one-on-one and kind of asking them, how am I helping you? Am I supporting you the way I need to support you? Is there anything I can help you with your development? Any areas of growth or concern that you need? So if you're a manager, you can actually ask your direct reports to kind of see how you're doing. You can go to kind of your coworkers at a certain point and say, in this meeting, especially after a meeting or whatever, if you brought something up in a meeting, you can say, hey, when I brought up such and such, and so responded, I wasn't quite sure if I was on the same page with everybody. Was there something I missed, or can you help me? So even after meetings, you can kind of get some feedback from your peers that way. And then with regards to management, if it's within the first 60, 90 days, yeah, you should have that sit down and make sure you're meeting expectations, and then the right right frame of mind or whatever with their expectations of what you're doing. But just as you continually move forward, if you request a meeting for your manager for a kind of a report and it's not your official performance review, I'm just saying, come to that meeting prepared with what you want to talk about. You run that agenda. Don't have them run it for you. I learned that the hard way. Make sure you have that agenda together and you run it versus having them run it. Oh, we have someone joining us.
Yes. Hello, Alice. How are you?
Hey, I'm joining via mobile. Just trying to. Usually I'm on my laptop, but this time I thought I would try the mobile.
Well, cool. So we see it's working. Welcome.
Yeah, it's working.
You're jumping in, and we've been talking about doing a SWOT analysis of your work reputation. And what I was going to tell Monica was that I remember specifically, remember the one place that I talked about in my very first day, that whole thing happened at the copy machine? Well, also too, as I'm working in this job and I have a relationship with, with my recruiter for this job. And so I'm thinking that we had this great relationship because we communicated and we joked around and we kind of had this, and come to find out, people were asking me about us two all the time. And I kept saying, why are people asking me about our relationship, or are we okay? I'm like, what is going on? Well, come to find out that this person, I'm not going to say he or she, was going around the office and talking about how we didn't get along, and I was bossy and all these other things. And I at that point had well enough knew myself enough to know what kind of manager I was. I said, why is he going around and saying that I'm that we don't get along, or we're just not working out as a team? And that was one of those things where that politics piece again, to where come to find, what I didn't realize is that person had applied for the job and did not get it. And then I was brought in as an external hire for this role. So from the beginning, instead of that person accepting the fact that, okay, they maybe feel like you were not ready, they came in with the agenda to sabotage the relationship from the very beginning. So they were being one way with me behind closed doors, but telling everyone else a completely different thing outside of that. So the perception was, that we didn't get along. So people come to me saying, oh, so you guys are getting along now? And it looks like you guys are look like you guys are getting better. I'm like, what are they talking about? And so, because I didn't know that's what he was doing. So that's one of those things where, how do you even, when you think you have a good relationship with someone and you don't, and I was checking in. I was checking in terms of, hey, am I giving you what you need? Is there anything we need to work on? How's our communication? Are you comfortable with the form of communication that we're using? Oh no, we're fine. You know, and then but at the same time, you're out there putting daggers in my back every opportunity you get, and then, you know, I'm hearing about it, you know, weeks later.
Right.
So sometimes it's just out of your control, because it's just one of those things where that person's whole agenda is just to be fake. They're in your face doing one thing, and behind your back doing something completely different. And how I wanted to resolve that was to bring in our, you know, HR manager and talk about it, you know, all three of us, to try to resolve what could really truly be the underlying issue.
Right.
And we never were able to resolve it. You know, they just denied that there was any issues, and that some of the coworkers are just trying to create this drama. So yeah, that was probably one of the most challenging places that I worked, that really taught me how to survive, you know, dealing with a lot of people who are around you who are just value system and just downright corrupt. I mean, they're out of business now, thank God. But part of their culture and what they were breeding, I mean, it was inevitable.
Wow.
Yeah, it was inevitable. But I was really shocked, because I thought we were so. I mean, you know, would call me on my cell phone in the evenings. How's you and your daughter? That whole thing, and then was sabotaging me the whole entire time. It was almost like you said, keep your enemies closer, and I think that's what I was perceived as. And that wasn't even the case.
Right. Wow.
Yep.
Huh. Yeah, that's difficult, because it's out of your hands. Like, you can't. How do you even navigate that? You can't really.
You can't, especially if you're doing something like a SWOT analysis, where you're checking in, like you said, you're checking in with them, because I mean, he didn't. We were colleagues. We were not co-workers. Regina Poole says that would you agree that the issues are never resolved because people don't do business with integrity? Absolutely. I think the company culture breeds that. If the company culture breeds respect and integrity, it depends on what that company culture breeds. That's going to determine, you know, how that relationship with him and I could have been resolved. Because here I am, I'm part of the leadership team. You know, we're not talking about down here on, you know, supervisor manager level. We're talking about part of the actual leadership team. So I'm above you, but yeah, we still can't resolve it. But the problem is that because I'm the outsider coming into the game, trying to play a game, that they're not letting me in the circle.
Right.
That was hard for me to get in, to even try to, you know, it was just like, I just really felt like I was one of those kids at the playground where they just would not let me on the monkey bars.
But, you know, maybe that's one of those cases where you kind of have to let was it black tax? Where you have to let your work be so superior and so good that they look beyond whatever the pettiness is, and they see your work and they see your value. So when they do hear some crap, they think twice about believing it.
Yeah, but I think that the difficult part for me at the time is that I was new. So in the politics and the culture was already so corrupt. I mean, it was really corrupt. It was so corrupt that even having stellar work would not have it would have taken a very long time to get
too long.
Yeah, or I would have had to sell myself. I would have had to kind of devalue my work values of what I believed in order to blend in with that, and it just wasn't meshing very well at all. I mean, there's some things you can tolerate. Oh, Regina says not the monkey bars. Yes, Regina, I said the monkey bars, girl. No, but there's some things when it comes to the company culture and office politics that you can kind of bend on. But then there's some things you walk in and you're like, man, this place is completely, utterly ridiculous when it comes to, you know, the whole work ethic. And I mean, not the work ethic, but the values. I mean, I didn't realize I was in a place where half of leadership was married to each other or dating each other.
Wow.
How can you compete with that?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes, like I said, and Monica and I have had these conversations before, you just don't know what you're walking into. when you take a new job. You don't know what you're walking into.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
And Regina says politics in the workplace is crazy. Yes, it is. And it's stressful. Don't you
Yeah.
agree?
It is stressful. Because like you say, you don't know what you're walking in. It's stressful in the beginning when you don't know what you're walking into. And then once you start to figure it out, then here's another stress that's going on, because now it's like, okay, now I know the deal. Now I got to, play this game and figure out how the game is played. So yeah, you always, gosh, it sounds like you always in some type of stressful position, unless, I'm sure there are some good companies. There are many good companies out there that politics aren't that crazy, but it all depends on the group of people that you work with. I was fortunate to have, and a company I used to work for, my coworkers, we were a team. I mean, we helped each other out. We were there for each other. It was kind of like, if you have a problem, we all have a problem. You got a problem with a customer, we all have a problem with that customer, and we would come together and figure out as a team how to solve it. So if you have a good group of people that you work for, then those politics aren't that pressing to you. I mean, they're still going on, but because you have such a good team, you kind of are protecting each other. So it's not always stressful. It can be, but if you work with a good group of people, then you can really enjoy getting up and going to work every day and not have to worry about, oh, what's so-and-so going to say? I got to make sure, if I see so-and-so, I need to do this, or stay away from them, or don't say something around them because I know they're going to spread this rumor all over the place, or whatever the case may be.
So Regina says, it's difficult to compete when you expect to know the rules. I've learned not to ask certain questions and to have more than one way to get information. My best allies are, and then she stopped there. So, no, you do have to learn how. Oh, okay, here we go. She's got the rest up here. The people who work in the kitchen, housekeeping, they know everything, and they look to the black women in my organization as
She said the people who work in the kitchen.
They trust you and they want to see you do well. Okay, I'm gonna have Monica interject on this, because Monica, remember what you told me about when you from a place you used to work, and how the janitor person was like, remember how they told you you gotta watch your back, remember?
Oh, well, this was I had started a new position. This was within the first 2 weeks, maybe. But this was this person sat me down and pretty much told me, don't trust so and so, and watch so and so, and watch your back. And this was like the first 2 weeks, and I'm sitting down with this person like, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know if they were being truthful with me. I didn't know if they was trying to sabotage.
Is that for
real? No.
But they were in a higher position kind of than where I was, and they was telling me this, and I was just like, okay. I was like, well, I'll let you see for yourself, but I was like, okay.
Well, that goes back to just like what I had shared. I had talked to share Monica this. I said, but when your manager tells you that you shouldn't trust them either.
Yeah.
You got a problem.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got a big problem.
That has happened to me.
I have a story like that though. I was working for a production company. Well, actually, it wasn't a production company. It was a government office, but it had its own little TV production part in it. And I had so wanted this job so bad, and I had applied for it the year before and didn't get it. Fast forward a year, they came to me and offered me the job because whoever was in the job didn't work out.
That was a red flag out. You know that, don't you?
Yes. The very first day I got in, I got acclimated to the place, got on the computer, and read all the drama that they took that guy through that had my position before. It was almost like he sent me a note. Like he just left me, here's what happened.
Wow.
This is what you can expect. I mean, everything was right there on the computer, and my heart just fell. It was...
I have never heard of that such thing. So wait a minute.
I was like, y'all didn't think to wipe the computer? You didn't think to get all of his stuff off the computer. They didn't. His whole drama with the supervisor, how she stabbed him in the back, how she did this, how she did that. everything was right there. And I mean, easy to print, easy to share. Everything was
Wow.
laid out. And I was scared to a degree. I was disappointed. And it was like, I can't believe I thought I wanted this job. And now I'm not so sure.
Mm.
But now that I'm here, I got to make the best of it. But at least on my first day, when she invited me out to lunch, for for your first lunch,
Mm-hmm.
your first day lunch,
Right.
I knew I knew what to expect, because I tried to inquire a little bit what happened with the last guy who had the position, and she talked about everybody in the office, but would not talk about that.
Mm.
She laid out everybody's business in the office, but would not talk about that. I was like, that's all right. I already got one side of the story, and I'm leaning toward his side. I gave you a chance.
Okay, so Alice,
But
let me ask you: you didn't share with anyone that that email was waiting on you, right? You
it
didn't tell
wasn't
anyone?
even an email. It was like a journal. He'd left all
My
the
goodness.
correspondence he sent to her. He had documented everything.
Wow.
It was almost like, dear person who comes behind me, this is what you can expect. And
You
it
know
was
what?
all
I'm
laid out.
sorry, but that is, I'm gonna have to say this. Viewers, forgive me. Don't do this, but that was pretty cool.
That was cool. It was real cool. It really was. Because the day after that, I knew exactly what to expect. I knew
Mm.
how to respond to her, what
Mm.
not to respond to, what she was expecting.
Mm.
So it was almost like he gave me the manual of this is what you're dealing with. This is what I tried. It didn't work. That's why you sitting here in the position that I had. And peace be unto you. I'm happy to be out.
Mm.
You know what? Just to talk about the elaborate on that just for a moment, because you have to remember that sometimes if you had the wrong person had gotten in their hands, what I'm saying is, that say they had hired someone whose work ethic was awful, or maybe they were corrupt, where they were
Hmm.
coming to be messy in the workplace, or they were going to be bringing some toxic behaviors into the workplace, right?
Yep.
Somebody who may have gotten that job who displays toxic work behaviors, which you can't really gauge that when you interview them. You just, that's a hard thing to gauge.
Mm-hmm.
But
Hmm.
they could have taken that, and that reputation, the person who wrote that or shared that information, could have been damaged at some point with that
Yep.
information. So that's why I say,
Hmm.
viewers, don't do that. Don't go and say, when I leave this job, I'm going to tell them everything. No, because that can come back to bite you at some point in your professional career if it gets in the wrong hands. Because even with
Yeah.
somebody backbiter or somebody who's trying to play the game and get there with them, like, look what the former person left. Oh my God, and just printed it off and gave it to a manager or gave it to someone higher up, and then that could have been
Oh
just,
no.
yeah.
I
But
kept
that
that.
can happen
I
though.
kept that to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that can
I
that
kept,
can have happened. That's just a scenario that I would have thought about in terms of looking at the bigger, broader picture of how that really could have got ugly.
yeah, but I decided to keep that information to myself. I was like, okay, thank you, powers that be. I'm
Yeah, that
forewarned
was
and forearmed.
No,
that.
but that was smart on your part, because
Mm-hmm.
if you really were green and didn't know any better, and you shared that as soon as
Hmm.
you started working that job, you wouldn't have made it.
No,
You
Right.
wouldn't have made it.
no.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. I didn't even print it off. I just let it. I just read it,
Mhm.
took it for what it was. Thank you, whoever had this job before me, and now let's just see how long I last.
Mm.
Or if it's true, or if all of what you say is true. And
Right.
he
Right.
wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong at all.
Mm.
Wasn't wrong at all.
But a lot of times they're not. A lot of times that experience is just what it is, and if those
Hmm.
other people haven't left, you're gonna feel that same thing. So that's
Yeah.
true.
I think.
Regina said we need to be more willing to mentor each other, not be crabs in the barrel. And I do agree with that. But again, it goes back to what Monica and I were talking about, learning what those relationships are, and feeling out the ones that you're going to be able to build those type of relationships with, and mentor or be mentored by,
Right.
versus,
Hmm.
sometimes we are crabs in the barrel because we have to be, because what the hell's in the barrel is probably not worth nothing.
Right.
I'm just saying it like it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know. So I have to.
Uh-oh, she froze.
Oh, if freezing happens, it
Yeah.
happens, it happens. But yeah, but I've had a crazy work experience too, where and I had two women
When
who
this
worked
is
literally
probably
behind me.
gone, or
We
right, or
talked
that,
about it all day.
It's,
yeah, or that's why they quit, or something like that.
mm,
Hmm.
You know, so that's typically what I've heard before, or even I've gotten it myself. But the one thing I always ask in my interviews is that the person who was previously in this position, why did they decide to leave?
oh yeah.
Oh,
I've
they, oh yeah.
Yeah, I always ask, why is this position available? Is it right? Did someone leave or they promoted? Yeah, I want to know what the deal is.
But you know they're only going to give you the PR answer. Oh, they just didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, but that's okay, because
Right,
what happens is what it's doing is giving you an indication of what you may be dealing with. So if they come back and make you an offer, and then you're maybe 30 days into this role, and you're like, so that manager told me that such and such left because of a new job offer. But really, what I found out is that you will quickly be able to decipher that at some point based on what they've said to you, if it's going to be the truth or a lie. But
right.
Yeah.
you have to do that, and I think when a place I used to work, and Regina said for the record she don't like barrels, girl.
Ah!
No, but for the most part, when I used to work in a job readiness program, and I would share with with the members all the time, you need to be asking questions in that interview process that's going to help you to determine if this is going to be the right place for you to work, or determine exactly what type of office politics you might be dealing with. Because trust me, a good recruiter or a manager should be prepared for those questions to be asked. But if they're squirming and feel irritated by you asking those questions, you need to look at that and say, is this somewhere I really want to work?
Right.
You
Hmm.
need to understand that we have power as candidates to choose where we want to work, if it's going to be right for us. We're not always at the mercy of the employer.
Right.
In terms of, I just got to have this job. No, I want to know if this is going to be right for me too, because I got to put you on my resume, and I don't
Right.
want you on there for 2 months because it didn't work out.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You never want to go into an interview. I've learned this the hard way, but when you're looking for work, that interview, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you.
Hmm.
And so they should be open with you, asking as many questions or answering as many of your questions as you are open to answering theirs. When they get to that point where they look like, okay, you got another question? You got another question? It's like, yeah, I do have about 10 questions I want to ask. Is that a problem? I'm interviewing you just like you're interviewing me.
Right.
Right, and it's important to do that. But going back to the SWOT analysis for your work reputation, there was one thing Monica said about during when you do your one-on-one with your direct reports, in reference to having them ask you feedback about you.
Mm-hmm.
I remember specifically one of my direct reports, when I would do the one-on-ones and ask, is there anything that in my performance that we need to work on to make sure we're communicating with each other, and that you're getting what you need from me to do your job, and what can I do better to help you do your
Right.
job in terms of me. And so I couldn't get that, but then I would get a call from my manager in terms of, well, such and such shared that this is kind of how they're feeling. Okay, so why couldn't they share that with me?
Right.
Because it's something that we could work on. So gauging that level of integrity from your direct reports or your coworkers I think it's huge. Have you ever dealt with that before, where you've had to gauge the level of integrity in terms of, are you truly getting the right feedback you need, from them, overall, not necessarily to do your job, but to help maintain and establish and build those relationships?
Mm. You don't always get the true feedback. You don't. And that's a hard thing, because sometimes I've had this conversation and you know it. I'm asking the question, what can I do to support you? And they're like, oh, everything's fine. And I really said to somebody, I was just like, let's take this professional veil off. I'm like, no, it's not. I don't know what it is that you're not telling me, but unless you tell me, we can't work through it. So you can sense when someone is not giving you the truth or telling you what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I don't know why you feel like you can't communicate that with me, but I just took the professional off, and I was like, look, I don't know what it is, but you're not telling me the truth, and I can't help you, and we can't, benefit. This relationship can't be beneficial to the both of us until you get honest. And then at some point, I would have to take it higher up, like, and I said, and I got real direct with this person. So unless there's something about this person I'm not aware of, here's where I'm at. So just in case that person wanted to try to manipulate the situation or sabotage it, I'm like, no. I'm like, you're not telling me something. I don't know why, but this is cut through the bull. Either tell me or this not going to be good. For you, not for me.
That goes into, I remember I worked at a place to where there was a manager who was quite eccentric. They really did not fit into the whole image piece of the company, but they really were good at what they did. The managers respected this manager.
Mm-hmm.
However, the direct reports did not like this manager. And, they worked hard to get this manager fired. And so, that's why I go back and I talked about, how, employees, how they play, how they can find out, how to play the game in terms of the politics to get what they want as well. And I mean, it was bad to where they were putting sliding notes up on the HR manager's door about this supervisor, a comment they made, or something they didn't like in a meeting that they said, or maybe it's something they wore that they felt that was offensive or inappropriate, and it necessarily may not have been, but because they wanted them gone, it was constantly something. So it was one of those instances where the manager was more or less being the one that was trying to be pushed out from his coworkers instead of leadership trying to push them out. They had people who were their subordinates, looking to push them out of the organization, and successfully was able to do it. So it's not always leadership who has that spirit of influence in terms to make some changes. If you don't have a strong leadership team or a strong HR team that can recognize that the problem may be this particular circle of employees, and we need to look at what their agenda is and why they're trying to do this to this manager, and why isn't this manager being protected in terms of feeling like they're being harassed, or what we call in the HR world trying to constructively being discharged, because it doesn't have to be by your own boss. If you've got someone even that's under you that's trying to do things to sabotage and push you out, it doesn't matter. So sometimes I think that you never hear about the manager stories from the employees kind of pushing them out, of their role, or out of their out of the organizations altogether.
Right.
Okay. And not only the ones that backstab, and the ones that the employees who report to you, but then the whole time they're trying to get you demoted so they can take your job.
Right.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot too. I've never had it happen to me, but I know a couple of people that it's happened to. All right. Well, it's about 9:18. So, Monica, you have any takeaways for tonight's conversation?
Well, I would just say, because as you're going into whether it's a new position or a position that you've been in for a while, to build those relationships and to be mindful, you have to take that in consideration, especially when you're new. You have to it's a lot going on. You got to learn the job, and then you have to build relationships. And keep in mind, look for those mentors, look for those sponsors, look for those people that you can talk to, because they're there. There's always going to be one or two people that will be there to encourage you, give you good advice, this, that, and the other. Find and latch on to those people. Be authentic with them, and that authenticity will come back. And if you find someone who's not, you'll learn that very quickly too. And then you can kind of grow and expand not only your career, whether you're in corporate or an entrepreneur, you still have to be able to cultivate and build relationships and work with people and have them help you, regardless if you're working for a corporation or if you're your own CEO.
That's true. That's true. Alice, what about you? I know you kind of came in a little late and jumped on, but
Yes.
any takeaways from you?
Yeah, I think when you're starting a new job, I think one of the first things you should be willing to do, I know sometimes we get really, really eager, and I think the first thing you need to do is just be observant and keep your ear to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Be really, really observant of the relationships, of how people respond to each other, who goes to lunch with who and when, who goes out together after lunch or dinner or whatever. Just be really, really observant, because a lot of times the stuff that you need to know will come right out in conversation if you are observant. So sometimes you want to be friendly and things of that nature to allow people to get to know you, but also sometimes just be quiet and listen.
Mm-hmm.
Just listen. And sometimes you'll pick up on very valuable information just in listening, not talking, but just listening.
Right.
And then I think once you're in a position for a while, and if you see something going on that is a little suspect, then there comes a time when you really have to question, how much am I willing to take to stay in this job, and is it worth it? I think a lot of times we get into jobs and we stay longer than we should. Sometimes, especially if you know that situation is not going to go in your favor or might put you in a bad situation. The question is, how long am I willing to put up with it, or how long am I willing to stay? You kind of have to know yourself really, really well to figure out, is it worth it?
But Alice, what about those times when you're 90 days into the job and then you're like, oh my gosh, I've made a mistake and now I got to deal with this. I have to get 1 year up under my mark so I can start looking again. Sometimes,
Well,
I say that you're entering these jobs at your own risk because you really don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think in a lot of instances, when you say when you're on a contract, is that what you mean? Where you can't leave, you just can't bounce when you want to? Is that what you mean?
No, not necessarily where you're on a contract. You don't have to be on a contract. It doesn't have to be a non-compete that you signed or anything. It's just that, if you're one of those people who believe in having good tenure on your resume, and now if it's something you absolutely cannot tolerate, okay, yes. But most people want to kind of ride it out. And that way that they're not looking like they're job hopping based on, because it's so hard to go into a job interview and say, why do you want to leave? Oh, well, because the office politics and the company culture is just corporate. It's just all you can't go into an interview and say that. Look at you.
Well, no, that's true.
Yeah,
so you have to figure out
that. You
got to figure out your strategy. You have to literally figure it out. Everybody in there is being strategic. Mm-hmm. And so you have to figure out what your strategy is literally going to be. It's like playing chess. Mm-hmm. It's almost, okay, I know I can move this way and get done what needs to be done. Or I can stay and move in a different direction and maybe not get to where I want to go as fast, but I can still get the job done. You literally have to figure out and move people and yourself around like chess, like a chess game. Because if you're in it to win it, if you're in it for the long haul, people will come, people will go, but you have to figure out, okay, what's my strategy? You have to be strategic, because you have to be on the offensive, and sometimes you have to be on the defensive, because you got to protect yourself, but you also have to figure out, well, how do I keep my ground? You got to figure out what your strategy is.
Part of your survival is you have to have those strategic relationships in place. You need to have those key influencers to who's in place in order for you to really survive the way you need to. Even if your goal is, say, you know what, I'm going to do 12 months, I'm out of here. You still have to have those relationships in order to survive that. Because if this is a job or a position to where really it can help to elevate your career, but it may not be the right place for that, you've got to get what you need from that job so you can take it to the next level, and you've got to survive in the meantime. Monica and I've had this conversation before. And sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes you have to exit, or they force you to exit, or hell, you exit and not by your own choice. But at the
Yep.
same time, you still need to get what you need from that as much as you can, so you can move on. And that kind of happens to, to a lot of people who may not know what to do. Because like I said, when you walk in these jobs, you just do not know.
Right.
My takeaways from this is that, I think I want people to really think about the SWOT analysis piece. Really find out what your performance level is before your annual review or the 6-month. Ask for one-on-ones periodically, maybe every 3 months with your manager. They may think, why do you want to meet so often? But you just want to, you can kind of just state that you want to make sure that things are where they need to be for the level of performance that you're expecting from yourself and from your manager. And I think that would help with that. But then I think the key thing is build the relationships, learn how to manage conflict, communicate, but mainly build those strategic relationships. You don't have to have a sponsor, but you can definitely find somebody who can be what I call the godfather in the workplace, that will have your back and protect you, even if you some people say you don't have the right complexion for the protection. You still can build the right relationships that can help you to move forward, And so, like I said, we talked about this on our Mighty Bell communities earlier about hard work and education, that sometimes it's not always enough. So,
Right.
You have to be able to build, strategic relationships, learn how to get your work recognized in the workplace with credibility and respect, and that can help you to survive that place, even if it's not a long-term goal to stay. You want to make sure you're making the right impact with those relationships, because those are the ones that are going to speak to you when you're gone.
Right.
Those are the ones that when you moved on and then someone comes into work there and they may know who you are, and then they say, oh yeah, I know who that is. I worked with them 10 years ago, such and such place, and then they'll have something to say about you in what your working relationship was while you were working at that job, not who you are now. So that's important to know. Our next Google Hangout is going to be on July 30th, 8 p.m. on a Wednesday again. And this time we're going to be talking about, what did we say we were going to be talking about, Monica?
I forgot.
Your professional net worth.
Okay.
We're going to be talking about on July 30th or 8 p.m. We're going to be talking about your professional net worth, not network, not your professional network, but your professional net worth. And what that means. We kind of started a little bit of the conversation earlier today on our Mighty Bell community about disparities amongst salaries between minorities or African American women, and how some companies may not necessarily, they may have limited experience working with African American women, so they may look at us and not see the value in what we bring to the table. They may say they don't have a strong network, or they do not have a circle of influence, and kind of helping to talk about through some of those disparities and how do you build a professional network, or not network, net worth as African American women. So that's what we're going to be talking about for our Google Hangout on July 30th at 8 p.m. For this recording will be uploaded here in a few minutes, so you can share it with your network. For those of you who missed it, we'll be sharing it on our Twitter and Facebook tomorrow morning. That's BCWNetwork.com is where you can join. If you are not a member, please do join us. And then last thing I want to share with you all that I always close out with is know your worth, know your worth, work in your strength, and work in your purpose. Again, till next time, Alice, thank you for plugging in with us. We appreciate you coming, and all of our viewers, we'll see you on the next Hangout, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.